I got something special. All right, I want to talk about a text that's very special to me, and I want to talk about why it's very special to me, why I treat this ethical theory a little differently than other ethical theories, but maybe you shouldn't. Okay, here's what's going on. I recommend us treating morality, ethics as some very complicated phenomena here in reality. We see it when we see someone doing something shameful. We see it when we see someone doing something honorable. We see it in play in acts that destroy others and acts that save others, like all the time. Okay, but it is a very complicated phenomena, and exactly what the structure of, like, the concepts, what the structure of morality is a very complicated thing. We want to understand morality. We're going to approach it through theory. But this is what we want to do. We don't want to see which theory we accept. And in fact, I've said this recently in class, and I'm not sure if it's entirely true. It feels a little bold, but just about no one accepts a theory, warts and all. Instead, they accept some kind of general structure of the theory and then theorize ways around all the various objections. We don't necessarily want to approach that, especially when what we're after really is an understanding of morality. It becomes a little unhelpful sometimes to too quickly find oneself becoming an adherent of this theory or that theory. Instead, I recommend a pluralistic approach, where we treat the theory as a lens on over here, the complicated reality we're after. We treat the theory as highlighting some really significant insight about this very complicated phenomena. So what we want to do is look at morality through the lens of a theory 2 times to adjust our understanding of that reality. What we want is an understanding of morality that matches more or less the very complicated phenomena out here in reality. Now, a theory is language, structure of concepts. Reality is reality. It's much more complicated than that. So we're simplifying it, and we're going to use other language, other concepts to kind of get some purchase on what's most significant here. So we learn from each theory 2 times. First, the curious approach it with wonder. What is this theory saying? What are the adherents of this theory? The people who proposing this theory, what are they seeing that's true, that's insightful, that's real through this theory? What are they building? What central insight are they building this theory around? So looking at what's core and convincing in the theory is going to help us to appreciate some elements of the reality that we want to understand. Second approach is the critical one. Where are the warts? Where are the problems? In what way does reality resist being described that way? What are the elements of this reality that the theory maybe puts at the margins where they really don't belong, or hides, the significance of? We want to critique the theory. What is it missing? How do we critique the theory? Well, we've got to have experience. We've got to have lived experience. We've got to have experience of reality. Stories. I had some students watch Les Mis recently. what is the reality that we're seeing? Who are the villains and who are the heroes? Who do you want to live like? Maybe you don't want to live in their circumstances, but whose life would you be proud to have lived? Anyway, so we want to look at each theory 2 times, and we'll go from one theory to another to get several different views of this, and looking at each theory 2 times, once with curiosity, with wonder, seeing what the theory highlights, once seeing what the theory hides or distorts, we walk away without ever really adopting any one theory, but having a fuller understanding of that reality. And we'll do this in several different ways. Some of these theories, we'll pull the lens out, we'll look at the lens itself, and we'll see the elegant structure. Like, ooh, we got this fancy lens. And it's like everything we'd want structurally it to be. And we plug it in and see, oh, what does it show us in the world? And some horrible things like, oh, why are we intentionally killing that patient on the table or whatever? All kinds of horrible things. Okay. Other lenses were like, ooh, this one feels like simple. It's almost transparent. It's almost like it's like designed just to show us the reality without any. I mean, that's fine, but if it doesn't have any structure to it, then it's maybe not doing the job of rendering this reality comprehensible in the relevant ways. It's not like theorizing, right? Okay, let me sidetrack here. Pierre Duhem says about scientific theories that what a theory really is a shorthand for a bunch of experience. Instead of needing to remember, oh, this experience gravity, these objects are moving towards each other at this proportion, and those objects were moving together at this. If you've got a theory that mathematically predicts how different objects are going to move towards each other, you can derive all those different experiences from it. The theory ends up being a shorthand. It's not really an explanation as much as a shorthand shaped like an explanation. So we're not thinking that we're getting some privileged access through our theory. What we're doing is using our theory to make sense over here. Make sense of the reality. Again, words aren't real. Words aren't things. Concepts aren't the world, I think. I mean, so there's always going to be some slipping between here. You never want to get lost in your theory. Oh gosh, I reflecting on some experiences of religion, and what's the difference between like healthy religion and religious psychosis? Is it the extent to which you're living in your mirror or you're living in your lens and the reality is not getting through? You're distracted in the lens. The lens isn't interpreting reality. The lens is hiding reality. Is that what, like, psychosis is? You kind of get lost in your theorizing? I don't know. Anyway, so what's the special thing that I want to share with you? Okay, so I've suggested 2 ways of approaching theory. One is this pluralistic way. The second way is you become an artisan yourself, more or less. All right, and not this meta artisan. I mean, this is its own kind of artisanship of rendering explicable what the process of learning this stuff is, but the crafting your own theory. Now you're going to start somewhere, but I say in class, I've said recently a few times, and it feels a little extreme. I'll hedge a little bit. Almost no one accepts the kind of stereotypical version of any of the ethical theories that we look at. that might be too strong. Most of the ethical theories we look at, most people aren't going to be just this straightforward Kantian or the straightforward utilitarian or the straightforward natural law theorist. Okay, because there are objections, right? There's things in the reality that the theory is obscuring, right? There's strong objections to theories, divine command theory, great example. So no one mostly is going to just bite all the bullets and say, you know what? You say it's an objection, but I say it's a feature. Now, generally, you're going to take the things that are really objectionable because you don't want to get caught missing the reality because of how you're stuck in the theory. You don't want to get caught not seeing the reality through the theory. Right? I mean, you want to be enlightened. What's one after here, right? So you might take a theory that you think is like particularly insightful, or maybe in some ways like speaking your language, and say, like, look, this theory, the way other people have spoken this language, maybe it does miss some things. Maybe there are some ways it's obscuring things. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my own version of it, and I'm going to fix it up, and I'm going to see if I can't clear up those areas so that it's no longer, without sacrificing the elegance, it's no longer obscuring anything, and it's really like doing an even finer job of highlighting the most significant parts. So using one theory to paint a really compelling picture to really be able to communicate. And this is what all this is about: putting into symbols so you can communicate, so you can share, so you can iterate, so you can enlighten others. So anyway, so you fix up a theory that you think is getting awfully close to kind of capturing and encapsulating all the insights that the other theories are getting too. Now, I still want to say you don't want to be terribly dogmatic about these theories and think that the theory now is no longer some human construct. This is still a tool for enlightenment, a tool for communication, a tool for ordering our concepts and navigating the world more effectively. And we don't want to say that because I've got this really handy like language for describing this reality, everyone else's languages are completely missing everything. I mean, you do want sometimes to do the creative work of theorizing, but I still recommend not falling into an exclusivist trap. This stuff is, the world admits of being described in multiple ways, with multiple metaphors, with multiple stories, sets of concepts, whatever. All right. So, Gottfried Leibniz. The work I'm looking at here is the Meditation on the Common Concept of Justice. And if this guy who, grew up in a kind of high control religious situation and has been working on the deconstruction and reconstruction of what is true religion, what is distortion of institutions and money and power, and what is like a genuine insightful way of theorizing these really central beliefs about these really central issues about what it is to be a human, what it is to have obligations to each other, what it is to be good, to be as good as one could be. Okay, the perspective Leibniz is coming. So going through a kind of deconstruction, reconstruction process, trying to kind of capture the value and retain the value of religion for organizing community, for organizing our understanding of the good and the divine and equality and morality and all that. Sure, I've seen problematic stuff, but if I were to kind of take that language and try to express what this deconstructed religious, trying to work it out in fear and trembling kind of person sees as a good life, this is the lens I would try to modify and fix it. This is the particular perspective that I think. Now, language is not like, everyone's most natural language necessarily, but I think this captures the morality from my perspective, from my experience, the reading and studies and living that I've done. This is where I would go, and not that I expect everyone to paint like I paint. You paint like you paint, and I want to help you paint it better, the way you want to do it. But if you want to see like what's the language that I think would like, maybe we could fix this up and give a pretty nice account of what's true and knowable and like religion and morality and stuff. This is where I would send you. So I want to share this with you with that background, with that disclosure. I mean, I'm a person. I'm a whatever. You dig? Could do better light. All right. So, Gottfried Leibniz, writing in the 17th century, the Protestant Reformation has kind of taken hold for, a couple centuries now, thereabouts. He is politically kind of a fan of Thomas Hobbes in some interesting ways. He likes the way Hobbes writes and the way Hobbes thinks and the way Hobbes defines things, and Spinoza too. He's working in this really interesting time where the old guard work, in the schools, still working in Latin. You got competing institutions who are willing to do things in different ways, and there's new ideas and working on translating these new ideas into the old language and what do you preserve from it's an interesting time. It's a really interesting time, and Leibniz is an interesting figure who works in this kind of political situation. He's like a librarian and genealogist for the Elector of Hanover at one point, who becomes King George the First with the Hanover of England, with the Hanoverian ascension. Anyway, it's an interesting person working in an interesting time. Leibniz is fascinated and does really interesting, powerful, transformative work in math, in the organization of scientific societies, physics, really interesting stuff. But has the weirdest Is it that weird? He's got this weird metaphysics that says that everything's ultimately made up of little souls. I mean, it's a weird language, but ultimately, for the 17th century, thinking that the world of physical extended bodies is grounded in a metaphysical reality of forces that don't exactly have rigid space, but are rather the kind of grounds of our experience of space in general, or the phenomena of space in general. It's not as disconnected as what we tend to think now, is with getting closer to the truth. Anyway, and as for someone whose ideas are hundreds of years old, it's amazing the power of this theorizing, and the ease with which one can translate between it and, if one squints, contemporary, like, quantum mechanical understanding of the world. Not stepping outside of my lane there. But all right. So what is Leibniz doing writing about justice here? Of course, working in the royal court, and working in issues of religion and morality, and this is well in his sphere. His sphere. Okay. So, Leibniz begins this work by basically applying the Euthyphro dilemma to divine command theory rather explicitly. When it comes to the relationship between morality and the divine, we can kind of see things in one of two ways. One, God is like this divine despot, a dictator telling us what to do, creating morality through the commands. If that's true, the commands need to be arbitrary. God can't have a reason. Of course, this is one of those warts that divine command theorists will try to work around usually. But if God doesn't have a reason for making this or that right or wrong, moral or immoral, then it's hard to see the significance of it. It seems like a power thing, right? It's about submission, it's about authority, it's about not getting punished. If God does have a reason for the commands, right, for saying murder is bad and helping people is good, then it seems that the reason is going to be doing the work rather than the command. Isn't God going to be kind of subjected to that reason in some way? Now, what Leibniz does is draw an analogy between a moral order and a mathematical order. Most people don't think that God decides that triangles will have three sides. The idea of the triangle includes three-sidedness, so in choosing to create a triangle, God chooses to create a being with three sides, or a thing with three sides. Morality is kind of like that, Leibniz thinks, and this is a generally eudaimonistic perspective, right? We see this in Aristotle, we see this in Thomas Aquinas. It is the nature of the human that dictates what's good for the human and what's bad for the human. Just like, maybe not just like, it's the nature of the rose that dictates to the gardener what caring for the rose well looks like and what caring for the rose badly looks like. Right? We care for ourselves, and each other, but it's the facts about what we are, what we need, what we're capable of, what our potential is, that tell us what it is to be good and what it is to be bad. Religion ought not bypass that, except as a kind of heuristic, make things simple, comprehensible, and dress it in some ritual to help, integrate it into people's lives. It's not a source of control, it's a source of information. And information is power, and morality should be power too. There. Okay, so Leibniz is going to take the perspective then that morality doesn't depend on the arbitrary commands of God, but rather we should do what God commands because what God commands is true. God has privileged access to human nature, understands morality, and any true revelation. The hermeneutic circle is complicated here, but any true revelation is going to tell us to do things that are genuinely good for human nature, for a human being. And any supposed revelation that tells us to do things that turn out to be self-destructive or destructive communities, or that's clearly not going to be true. So if it's, it wouldn't fit a theology that includes a true God to have that as a revelation. Anyway, the hermeneutic cycle here is rather complicated, but it could be a little simpler. I mean, Jesus says that there's nothing in the law contrary to love. And isn't that a helpful interpretive tool? I think it is. Okay, so Leibniz is going to take the side that justice is something built into the order. We can get some access, Leibniz thinks further, to the concept of justice, to the nature of justice. It's a complicated thing to theorize this, by contemplating the divine in another way. So again, this work is the meditation on the common concept of justice. Common, what that's doing here, Leibniz thinks that this is rather Platonic as well, right? And let me put it this way: in Plato's Republic, Plato exploits this kind of univocal understanding of language. He thinks that justice, wherever it is going, justice is justice, whether we're talking about the justice of a law or the justice of a soul or the justice of a community. Justice is justice. And understanding justice in any of those contexts should give us access to the concept of justice. So Leibniz thinks similarly, that what it is to be a just human and what it is to be a just God are going to be the same justice. Now, human and God are different, but a just human and a just God should be somewhat similar. You'd have to translate it into the different nature, but Leibniz thinks that contemplating divine justice should be revelatory for human justice in some way. And it just so happens that Leibniz has been working his whole life trying to understand divine justice. And what he comes up with is powerful and a little bizarre. Powerful, unbelievably powerful, maybe a little unbelievable. Let me back into this for a second. Let me do a little signposting here. Leibniz is trying to describe the nature of justice and the relationship between the divine and morality. Is justice just doing what God says, or is there more to it? He's done a lot of work on theodicy. How is it that we're living in a world with evil and suffering, supposed to be the product of an all-good and all-powerful God? How do you square those? How do you give an account of the justice of God and the creation of this world that includes evil? There's kind of two parts to this account. Let's say the hypothetical part and the empirical part. The hypothetical part and the empirical part. If things are this way, then sure, God created this world and God's just. The hypothetical part. If these conditions are met, if the relationship between God and these actions is theorized like this, if it's like this, then even though God created a world with evil in it, God's good. So there's the conditional part. If it's like this, then sure, I understand the justice of God. That's all about what would it mean for God to be just. That's all about, it's like ideal theory, to use language of like more contemporary Rawlsian political theology, although political philosophy, although this, I'll leave that alone. I find it useful to talk about ideal theory and non-ideal theory in relation to Plato's Republic too. I don't know enough about the context of other people do that. Do other people do that? Does anyone know? I don't know. Anyway, but it makes all the sense in the world. Like, Plato's not telling you to actually build a society like this. He's theorizing. Kind of a Tower of Babel. So, of course, it comes out feeling like fascistic. Anyway. It's just, anyway. So, what Leibniz is doing. Have I mentioned that I have ADHD? I should control yourself here. Okay, so what Leibniz is doing, right? He's got the hypothetical part. If things are like this, then yeah, it makes sense that God is just. And it's really about theorizing justice. Then there's the empirical part. Are you going to interpret things such that, is it natural to see the world as being like that? I don't want to reduce this too much. I don't want to simplify this too much, but one thing that Leibniz says is, look, if what God produced is the best of all possible worlds, then, yeah, like, even though there's evil in it, the total couldn't be improved on, then yeah, it'd be reasonable to say that God's just even for producing it. There are a few other little caveats in there, okay, but just to highlight the hypothetical versus the so-called empirical, I'm calling it that, the empirical part. If this is the best of all possible worlds, then sure, God's just. Is this really the best of all possible worlds? Leibniz says you can't know that it's not, because reality is infinite, and you'd be comparing it with other infinites, and the evidence, what you actually like can empirically and know about the world, is such a finite portion, that like swamped, everyone's living through a very unique time. It's nothing in the course of an unending history, right? I mean, so how are you going to be in a position to know that from where you are on the pale blue dots in the anyway? Is it natural for you to look at the world and say, oh, this is the best of all possible worlds? No, it's very Panglossian. I mean, this is the thesis that Voltaire makes fun of in Candide with the character of Dr. Pangloss. I don't know if you... Anyway, so whether or not you find it helpful for understanding, like, how a just God could produce a world with evil in it, we might still find it helpful in giving us a concept of justice. Under what conditions, even though there's obviously tragic, traumatic, systemic, malicious, senseless evil in this world, it was justly produced by a good God. Whether the account of the world that Leibniz gives makes sense, the account of justice he gives might still make sense, even if you don't find it worth having faith that, like, this world is like divinely ordered. Okay, so here's the thing: it's not just the unimprovable. Distracting myself with the camera. It's not just the unimprovability of the world. There's a few different parts of it. All right, moving parts, conceptual structure here, right? Why does God create the world that he creates? Because he can't do any better. God is motivated by individual goodness. Taken in isolation, take some state of affairs in isolation. If it's a good state of affairs, or rather, to the extent that it's a good state of affairs, how are we going to define goodness? This is complicated, right? But yeah. More reality, more perfection, more complex structures, more capability to exist and carry on, whatever. You might have to have a little faith we will work that out or theorize around that, or maybe we know that there's a place where words will fail us, but is this a good communication tool? Is it okay? Is there a reason God created the world at all? God's motivated by goodness. To the extent that something's good, God wants that thing to exist. Okay. Leibniz is going to divide the divine will into two. There's the pre-side and the post-side. God's antecedent will, individually is a good way to think about it, desires each good thing. For each person. Not all good things are compatible. I remember the Jim Carrey movie, Bruce Almighty, right? Where, Jim Carrey takes the role of God for the day and just says yes to all the prayers, right? But they both wanted to win the Super Bowl or whatever. Not all good things are compatible. To be just, or rather, it's a necessary condition for justice, without which God would not be just. If God did not want each good thing individually, there'd be something improvable. Say God could be more good. That wouldn't make any sense, right? If we're theorizing, perfect goodness, perfect justice is going to desire each good thing for each agent, for each subject. But not all goods are compatible. Okay, so we got one, little criteria. God's got to have these antecedent wills that are purely positive. Okay, and then the consequent will is mostly about reconciling, structuring, as economically as one can, the largest collection of these antecedent goods. So God wants every good thing for everybody. How does that translate into an action? If it doesn't translate into an action in a very effective way that respects these individual values, then there's something improvable. Then someone could say, I'm being treated unjustly. I'm getting a short end of the stick here. That makes some sense. So God has to desire every good thing and produce the outcome that best respects all of those things. Be unjust otherwise. Does that mean, say, in an arrangement where, someone is going to get the less, someone is going to suffer more, or enjoy less, or we've got a complicated world here. Again, we don't want to get lost in our lens. We do want to see through it. We got herds being thinned out by predators in ways that produce a kind of bloody harmony. We don't want to idealize that away too much. There is something forensic in the compromise of all these individual goods, and maybe our theorizing here is too sanitary already, but can God justly say, create an outcome where someone is left out in some way, right? Has a unfortunately short life, or a life of more suffering than is really owed. I think there's a way you can see it as justified if it's a necessary part of how to pack this much rich goodness. I mean, you've got to see the creative force in the destructive fire in some way. I mean, I don't know. It's there's a certain awe. And gosh, here I am reminded of, Job speaking into the whirlwind, or the whirlwind speaking back to Job, saying, you're just a human and I'm God. What do you have to say? Like, I find that so unsatisfying in some ways. Like, there isn't an actual defense of justice there. But the awe at the violence that's part of the unfolding, the changing, if it's baked in to the compromise, to the way of fitting all these goods together. We're all living on the same proteins. If there's any way for that to be just, it's gotta involve the good justifying the limits. The system isn't wronging someone who's just, at the bottom of the system. And here I'm saying system is kind of a nature, a natural. Okay. I really just want to allude to some of those things, mostly, right? Working on the problem of evil. We don't need to get into that deeply, but now let's think, if we can give an account of, look, under these conditions, where literally that's in a dynamic, changing world of things coming to be and passing away out of the same proteins, and we're stardust and all that, right? If that is part of the best possible world, even with the pain of it all, even with the opportunity to have morally significant actions, which means that evil, wicked people will victimize others, and nature doesn't, not in this life that I've experienced, have the compensation for the victims. Can you have it just? So Leibniz is going to have some reference to an afterlife to kind of account for those imbalances. I don't know how it's awfully tricky to incorporate an afterlife in these ways, in ways that don't feel like it's like spiritual bypassing. Another way, where it's just trying to distract ourselves from feeling like, distracting ourselves from the safe fear or suffering or elements of reality that we're maybe not ready to face. But if there is a justice for people who are victimized in this world, that sort of justice does not seem to be something I experience in this world. So any theorizing about that sort of justice is going to require some sort of afterlife. Or maybe at least the idea that in this life, even when it doesn't feel that, are we denying our experience? Even when it doesn't feel that, it is better to suffer injustice than to cause injustice. It's better to be a victim of other people's inhumanity than to make oneself inhuman in those ways. Okay, so that's not quite justice. That might be a naturalized version of justice. Am I doing too much philosophy and not enough teaching here? That might be. Anyway, so Leibniz argues for univocity here. In other words, since we can theorize divine justice and we feel like we can, that problem is so concrete and so worked over and so, concrete, particular. This divine being creating this world, it's really clear case. So kind of like Plato in Republic saying, rather than talk about justice in the soul, I don't know what that's supposed to be the soul for me right now. I don't know. Rather than talk about justice in the soul, this is a lot more complicated. We can't even really see it. Let's talk bigger scale and talk about justice in the state. Rather than talk about what it is to be a just human, oh gosh, I don't know if I have that objectively, for one thing. I might be too fair to myself, or for some other reasons, I might not be fair enough to myself. Maybe I don't have the best perspective on that. Okay. Are you ready to argue that God has wronged you? Or under what conditions God has wronged you? Or are you ready to defend the justice of God in light of like a rather complicated? Well, let's do that ethics and see if we have some insight into that. It took me a while writing this dissertation years ago on the problem of evil to recognize the extent to which this is a moral theorizing issue rather than like metaphysical issue primarily. It was a really interesting revelation. Anyway, so all that theorizing about divine justice can be translated into human terms. What would make me an unjust individual? One, what if I didn't expect that to happen? Oh well. This is more fun when I don't edit it. Is this true? Sometimes it might be true, other times probably fooling myself. Comment with your ideas. Anyway, I hope you feel like you get to know who I am a little bit. Maybe more than a little bit. Anyway, so one. Okay. If you are wanting destruction for people, not to disarm villains, just keep using this language, but to destroy people, to see people suffer. If you want bad things for people, even in some way bad things for bad people, that goes beyond the harmony of it all, the appropriateness, the proportional appropriateness of it. Proportionality, right? If you're ready to say one of us, all of yours, then there's an injustice there. Is Leibniz holding us to God's standards? What's the point of theorizing the divine if we're not trying to kind of capture perfect virtue? Anyway, so these are interesting questions for, keep I'm projecting it. You're asking those questions. Anyway, so what's the next thing I'm going to say? Okay, so one, if you don't want good things for everyone, then it's unjust in some way. And second, if you let some distortion happen in that transition from wanting the goods to an action, if you privilege certain goods more than deserve to be privileged, what does that mean? Well, here's a question. And now I'm moving over to part 2 in some ways, where Leibniz starts more kind of looking for a formal definition. He gets into the theoretical work after doing the more kind of meditative stuff. He gets into the theoretical work. Let's try to define in these stages kind of way the nature of justice. And he's kind of building on and collecting, honestly, I'm following Leibniz's example here. This is what he's doing. He's got all these insights that he's seen, and he's doing the synthesizing work for us. So anyway, so where were we? If you don't want every good thing for everybody, and if you are distorting the transition there, if you're okay, that's right. So he's going to start theorizing the nature of justice in this kind of successive way. All right, starting with a kind of, what do people think of as like a bare minimum of justice? And is that really all there is to justice? And he's going to use the divine, he's going to use practical reasoning in various ways to kind of push for a more expansive understanding of justice. All right, in the background, remember, for us in the background, remember when John Stuart Mill starts theorizing, like, what does justice look like for a utilitarian, and says that justice is a subordinate maxim. Generally, the utilitarian says do as much good as you can do, and part of that is to be just. Usually, there's tension. Like in the classic, should you sacrifice the organ donor for the good of the 5 patients or something, right? There's this tension. I want to do as much good as I can, but justice puts this limit, this appropriate limit on what I do. So justice is more about not harming others, not violating others' rights, whereas beneficence, utility, something, is the do the good thing. Okay. Leibniz is going to start with this very base justice. What does justice? Some people think that they're just as long as they're not harming anyone. It's a very minimal sense. I didn't hurt you, so I'm being just. How could I be unjust? I had nothing to do with that person. Can you ever unjustly do nothing? Can you be guilty of depriving someone of something they're owed when you didn't do anything, right? By not doing anything. So, there's this very straightforward standard of justice that says anytime that you've harmed someone, they have a just complaint against you, that's when you've been unjust. That's basic. Would we apply that standard to God? We don't even need to go that far. Gives this example of the elephant, right? Suppose, it's known that there's this elephant that comes around and sometimes chases people, but responds. When you beat the drum, the elephant gets scared and runs off the other direction. You're sitting there by the drum, someone's getting chased by an elephant. Hey, save my life. Elephant's going to kill me. I need you to play the drum. Just not feeling very musical today. You did nothing and it was unjust. You owed help in that instance. Usually helping people is a imperfect duty. You pick and choose when to exercise it. But in urgent cases like that, you owe. It'd be unjust of you not to give positive help. Okay, so justice requires that we not harm each other, that we not harm others, and that we help what? When? He kind of follows Hobbes at first. Says we help when we could reasonably expect help back. I'd like to live in a society that, like, doesn't imprison people when they fall in hard times, just for being poor. No debtor's prison or something like that. This is a good thing. So, well, I should try to enact that for everyone, right? If I'm expecting to kind of benefit from that sort of thing, then I should be advocating for others to benefit from that sort of thing. And to be able to find someone to lend a hand when you're moving, well, then you better, you owe it to someone to sometimes help people when you're moving. You're reasonably expecting to benefit from that sort of thing. You should obligated to participate. Now, again, this is kind of grounded in human flourishing. This is grounded in human nature, but notice it starts coming out in these like universal maxims that feel more Kantian. Is that what's going on? Anyway, so we owe it to not harm others and to help when we can reasonably expect to receive help in return. Is that it? This is when the divine case really comes around. If that's all God did, and this is the world that we got out of it, this is not enough. If God just doesn't like punish us, and maybe we're pretty good. I mean, it's not like we're going to make a world for God. He needs an okay world. Could have done better, but even though there's no limitations on God, just, for no good reason, didn't want to do better by us. You could. It mattered. And you didn't. I mean, I'm religious, I try to be on God's side of these kinds of things. I theorize divine justice, but still not good enough for me. Not good enough for me. Every blessing. Why? Why? There better be a reason to not give every good thing. Now, we're finite creatures. We got lots of reasons. There's lots of ways I can't help everyone I know move. Wouldn't even be good for me to help everyone I could possibly help. I destroy my capacity to help people. We got limitations. We got to respect those limitations. But if we're not doing good for some reason, it's not good enough. Justice is going to require doing as much good as you can in some ways without hurting people in the process. Now, notice that what this is getting into feels utilitarian in some way. It's pushing this kind of maximal impact. Your obligations are large, not small. The melding of love and justice here, love, beneficence, and justice, the formal definition that he gives. Justice is the charity of the wise. It is that love, that antecedently wanting all good things, and the wisdom, the reconciliation of that, the acting in a way that best respects all that individual stuff. I mean, Leibniz does his calculus stuff, right? And so that's love and wisdom combined is going to give you justice. But look, normally, if you're not as beneficent, I don't know, it tickles me. If you're not as beneficent, if you're not doing the most good you can be, that's not a huge criticism, usually. Even if it's not without reason, it's just like, I didn't feel like helping people today. It's my money or whatever, like, okay. It's not a big critique to tell someone that, they're not as generous or not as loving or not as upbuilding as they could be. I mean, one ought to aspire, but it's not a cancelable offense, maybe we want to say. But if someone's unjust, that person is not a just person. That person is untrustworthy. I mean, this is a deep criticism. This is a, not only are they not going to help you as much as you might wish they could help you, but they're dangerous, destructive. Injustice feels like a bigger deal. It carries more weight in some way. Leibniz, to be just requires love and the loving actions that follow from it. It requires you to want the good for the people around you, the good for all the people, to see people with love and want to build them up and want to, you got limits, but want to provide the things that they need. It's grounded in human nature. It's grounded in what's good for the human. What is it to flourish? It pushes us to do a lot of good like the utilitarian does, and it is absolutely respectful of like individual autonomy and rights and like equal dignity kind of stuff, like the Kantian. And it's got God as this central, like, moral exemplar, conceptual lightning rod, in, I think, evocative and powerful ways. So, what do we do with that? What do we do then? What does that look like for, say, prison? For, say, social policies? For you and your own community? For parenting? Give people arbitrary rules? You judge people for slipping down? You helping people up? You doing the good? Ooh. Here's a nice little spot of practical application. At one point, Leibniz discusses the golden rule and asks, does the golden rule capture like the totality of morality? And he says, no, not straightforwardly. Because imagine this. Imagine a murderer. It's in front of a judge, being sentenced, and the judge says, could the murderer, found guilty, say, well, Your Honor, look, if you were me, wouldn't you prefer a lighter sentence? Wouldn't you want a lighter sentence? Well, do unto others as you would have done unto you. So the golden rule says that you should give me a lighter sentence. Have a time served, judge. The issue is, right now, the judge should absolutely, Leibniz thinks, this difficult pill for some people to swallow, absolutely want every good thing for that prisoner, including freedom. Including power, including, money and safety and joy. But at the same time, has to want every good thing for everyone else. potential victims, past victims. I mean, family members of past victims. What does it say about? What are the consequences to society if we say that the victims were worth? There's a lot that goes into this. So yes, the murderer deserves the love, deserves divine love, deserves the judge's compassion and consideration, just like everyone else. No cruel and unusual punishments. But it's the totality that wins the day. It's beautiful. It's a very effective theory. I think it pushes us in very helpful ways to try to expand our love, expand our compassion, look at people suffering with compassion as a genuine problem, whether whether they're victims or not in other contexts, right? I mean, it's a very radical, while very traditional religious perspective. I don't know. I find it very powerful, and a very effective way for thinking about human and divine justice. Love to hear your thoughts and comments.